Have you ever been disrespected so deeply that every part of you wanted to react, lash out, defend yourself, prove a point? But instead something inside you whispered, "Stay quiet." Not because you didn't care, but because you cared more about your peace than their chaos. Silence is not weakness. Silence, when born out of clarity and containment, is the voice of an individual who has chosen sovereignty over reaction. In the face of disrespect, many feel compelled to retaliate, to explain, to defend their sense of worth through argument or confrontation. But the one who remains still is not passive. They are in possession of themselves. The ability to remain quiet is not the absence of feeling, but rather the presence of order within the psyche. It means the ego has not seized control. The inner world has not been hijacked by the chaotic pull of the outer insult. The human ego, by design, craves validation. It wants to be seen as right, as respected, as powerful. When someone disrespects us, it is the ego that flares first. It shouts for a response, for defense, for vengeance. But when a person chooses silence in that moment, they are choosing to act not from ego, but from the self, the deeper, truer self that exists beyond appearances and temporary roles. This self is anchored. It does not flinch easily. It is not threatened by external perceptions, because it knows that identity cannot be handed to you by others, nor taken away. Those who speak out instantly, harshly, are often driven by an internal state of disarray. Their response is not a decision, it is a reflex. But silence, in contrast, is a decision. It is restraint born from awareness. It is the practice of watching your emotions without being consumed by them. Disrespect can stir many feelings: shame, anger, disappointment, but none of these need to be acted upon in the moment. To recognize a feeling and choose not to externalize it is a mark of depth. It is a sign that the conscious mind is no longer a puppet of the unconscious. This is not suppression, it is transformation. You do not stuff the emotion away, pretending it doesn't exist. You witness it, you observe its rise and fall, and in that process, you create space. In that space, something remarkable happens. The insult loses its power. It floats in the air, unreceived, because disrespect, like any energy, requires an anchor in order to land. If you do not receive it, if you remain grounded and unmoved, it cannot settle. It dissolves, and often the one who delivered it is left exposed, naked in their aggression, revealed in their instability. That's the paradox. Silence holds a mirror up to the other. Your quietude becomes their reflection. Without your reaction to distract them, they are confronted with themselves. This is how karma begins, not in some mystical ledger in the sky, but in the psychological echo chamber we all live within. When someone lashes out and receives only stillness, they are left to sit with the noise they've created. That's how inner consequences take root. The person who can stay quiet has made a pact with themselves. They have accepted that peace is worth more than proving a point. They have realized that not every battle is theirs to fight, and that some wars are won by refusing to enter the arena. In the stillness of that refusal, something inside grows stronger. Call it dignity, call it self-respect, call it the quiet power that belongs only to those who have walked through fire and chosen not to throw flames in return. To be silent is not to be invisible. It is to be impenetrable in that moment. It is to signal to your own psyche that you are not ruled by emotion, that you are not reduced by someone else's immaturity. The more you practice this, the more you cultivate inner mastery, not just as a skill, but as a way of being. There is immense intelligence in silence. It does not mean you haven't felt the sting. It means you are not willing to bleed for someone who hasn't earned your energy. It means your response is being crafted internally in the form of self-work, in the form of reflection, in the form of rising above. Silence teaches the world that not everything deserves your attention, and in doing so, it makes your attention more valuable. Silence is not a void, it is a vessel of power, of choice, of presence. And the one who chooses it, especially in the face of disrespect, is the one who controls the narrative of their own soul. They are no longer a leaf in the wind, they have become the tree. There is a psychological architecture that shapes our responses to pain. When we feel disrespected, something deep within us reacts, not just from the surface emotion, but from layers built over years of experience, trauma, insecurity, and identity. Retaliation often feels like a release, a way to take back control when someone has tried to rob you of it. But what we often fail to see in that moment is that retaliation rarely delivers power. Instead, it transfers it. It gives your emotional equilibrium over to someone else, letting their actions dictate your inner state. To react is to become entangled. To retaliate is to hand over your peace in exchange for temporary satisfaction that never fully satisfies. The person who disrespects you is revealing something about their own state, not yours. They are projecting. They are leaking what they cannot contain. That projection may look like judgment, belittling, mockery, or even subtle dismissiveness, but all of it stems from a place of inner fragmentation. When you understand this, you begin to see their disrespect not as an attack to be countered, but as a signal to observe. When someone's words or actions carry the intention to harm or diminish you, it becomes crucial to separate their emotional state from your identity. You are not what they say or how they behave. You are the one who decides whether or not to carry that energy forward. Choosing not to retaliate is a test of emotional maturity. It means you are self-aware enough to recognize that your dignity is not dependent on anyone else's validation. In fact, those who are truly secure in themselves don't need to return fire when someone throws emotional stones. They simply stand still and let them fall to the ground. The impulse to prove yourself, to defend your honor, stems from the need to be seen, heard, and understood. But that need, when driven by desperation, becomes a weakness. Real strength lies in knowing who you are so deeply that you don't require an audience to confirm it. Disrespect is a mirror. It often reveals what others believe about themselves, not about you. If a person is bitter, they will see you through bitterness. If they feel small, they will try to shrink others to feel taller. When you retaliate, you step into their distorted world, allowing their wounds to shape your behavior. But when you pause, breathe, and allow the moment to pass without resistance, you are choosing reality over illusion. You are letting the moment remain theirs, not yours. This doesn't mean silence is easy. It takes more strength to remain calm than to lash out. It requires inner regulation, self-discipline, and a profound understanding of your worth. Sometimes it will feel unjust, like you're letting someone get away with treating you poorly. But true justice doesn't always come in the form of confrontation. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through consequence. People live in the wake of their actions. Every word, every act of disrespect ripples outward, and those ripples eventually return to their source. You don't have to be the hand that delivers the lesson. Life does that in its own way and time. Letting karma speak does not mean passivity. It means trusting that cause and effect is a universal law, and that energy always returns to its origin. You do not need to rush to correct the scales. Life has a way of doing that without your interference. Your silence in the face of disrespect is not surrender. It is an act of faith in natural justice, in emotional equilibrium, in the long game. It says, "I know who I am, and I don't need to prove it through noise." When you resist the urge to retaliate, you preserve your energy for creation, growth, healing. You channel that fire into something meaningful, rather than wasting it in defense of a moment that, ultimately, will fade. You shift from being reactive to being intentional. And intentionality is the foundation of power. People notice when you don't respond. It unsettles them. It makes them reflect. It breaks the chain of unconscious behavior. In that space of non-reaction, something inside you grows quieter, wiser. You begin to understand that not every insult is a call to battle. Some are invitations to rise. And when you rise, you stop meeting people where they are. You start living from where you are meant to be. That is the power of not retaliating. It is not weakness, it is mastery. One of the most misunderstood aspects of emotional maturity is the power of observation. When you are disrespected, the automatic reaction is often to respond, to clarify, to correct, to confront. But there exists another path, one that requires deeper introspection and discipline. To observe rather than react. This path isn't about silence in weakness, but silence as a strategic form of self-preservation and growth. When you allow yourself to simply observe another person's behavior without getting swept up in the waves of emotional response, you step outside the theater of their projections and step into your own sovereignty. Observation brings awareness, and awareness brings clarity. Through observation, you start to recognize patterns, not just in others, but in yourself. You notice how certain tones trigger you, how specific words wound you, how your body reacts, how quickly your pride wants to take the driver's seat. But with patience, you begin to watch these inner movements without acting on them. This inner watching becomes your strength. It's not detachment in the cold sense of the word. It's intimacy with yourself. And in this intimacy, you build emotional resilience. Disrespect often comes from people who lack self-control, who are consumed by the chaos they carry within. When they lash out, what they're really doing is exposing that chaos to the world. They're handing you their pain, wrapped in sharp words, hoping you'll open it and carry it too. But through observation, you learn not to take the package. You let them carry what is theirs. In that moment, your calm becomes a mirror in which they may, perhaps later, see their reflection more clearly. When you observe rather than react, you also allow time to enter the equation. Time is a great revealer. In the silence of your non-reaction, the truth about people begins to surface. You start to see what drives them, their fears, their wounds, their insecurities. This clarity doesn't necessarily make you love them more or less, but it gives you understanding. And understanding creates space for compassion, not always in the form of forgiveness, but in the form of non-engagement. You don't have to fix, change, or punish. You simply step back and allow them to be who they are while choosing to remain who you are. Observation also lets you preserve your dignity. There is a deep inner stability that comes from knowing you can witness even the ugliest moments and still remain grounded. It teaches you that your peace is not reactive, but cultivated. When you consistently choose to observe instead of retaliate, your nervous system begins to trust you. It doesn't spiral at every provocation. It knows you won't abandon yourself just to prove something to someone else. This is the essence of emotional strength. Not being unshaken, but knowing how to return to your center after being shaken. Most people react because they want to be seen, heard, acknowledged. They want to prove their worth or demand justice. But observation teaches you that not every audience deserves your performance. Not every insult requires a defense. And not every aggressor has the capacity to understand your truth. When you act from a place of calm awareness, you reclaim the energy that would have been wasted in confrontation. That energy can now be used for creating, for healing, for evolving. By observing rather than reacting, you also stop the emotional momentum of the conflict. You refuse to feed it. Every drama requires participants, and sometimes the most powerful role you can play is that of the one who steps off the stage. You leave the play unfinished, not out of fear, but because the story is no longer worth telling. The moment you realize that your silence is not emptiness, but wisdom, is the moment you step into a deeper level of consciousness. You begin to act with purpose rather than impulse. In observation, you also develop foresight. You begin to see where certain interactions are leading. You recognize red flags faster. You no longer need long explanations or repeated offenses to understand someone's intentions. You see with your intuition, your gut, and your calm awareness. That kind of vision protects you far more than words ever could. So when someone disrespects you, take a breath. Don't rush to respond. Don't let the discomfort push you into action. Simply observe. The truth is already speaking. Let it reveal itself. Let it unfold. And in your stillness, you'll find not only clarity, but an unshakable sense of self that no disrespect can tarnish. Emotional detachment does not mean the absence of feeling. Rather, it is the mastery of feeling without being enslaved by it. The fourth principle invites us into the quiet space of stillness, a place where we intentionally step back from the entanglement of others' projections and opinions and allow our inner equilibrium to guide our path. When disrespect enters our lives, there is a natural instinct to defend the self, to prove our value, to retaliate against insult. But in doing so, we often sacrifice our peace to preserve our pride. This is where detachment becomes not a withdrawal, but a wise redirection of our energy. Stillness is misunderstood in a world that moves fast. We are conditioned to respond quickly, to be seen acting, to display our outrage, to publish our rebuttals. But what happens when we decide not to be dragged into the theater of reaction? We discover a deeper awareness, an internal sanctuary where external chaos cannot reach unless we invite it in. Emotional detachment in its highest form is a refusal to let someone else's storm soak your soul. It's the realization that someone else's judgment, disrespect, or projection does not need to become your emotional burden. When we practice this kind of emotional detachment, we begin to see life and people more clearly. Our perception sharpens, not because we are indifferent, but because we are unclouded. The fog of needing approval lifts. The weight of being misunderstood becomes lighter. The urgency to explain ourselves fades. We start to move from a place of deep-centeredness rather than scattered defensiveness. The very act of stepping back allows us to see the broader landscape of any situation, including the root of others' behavior and the mirror it holds up to our own boundaries. In detaching emotionally, we don't stop feeling, we begin to feel more intelligent. There's a vast difference between being reactive and being responsive. The reactive mind is a prisoner to every trigger, every unkind word, every subtle dismissal. The responsive mind pauses, it evaluates, it asks, is this worth my energy? Is this a reflection of me or them? Is this interaction helping me grow or pulling me backward into old patterns? Emotional detachment gives us space to answer these questions before deciding to speak or act. Much of the pain we carry is not from the disrespect itself, but from our attachment to the idea that people should behave differently. We expect fairness, we expect kindness, we expect reciprocity, and when these expectations are not met, we suffer. Detachment is not the abandonment of standards, it is the understanding that not everyone meets them, and we don't have to lose our center in the process. We stop expecting a person who cannot regulate themselves to treat us with the regulation we've developed, and instead of engaging in that imbalance, we step out of the emotional tug-of-war entirely. Stillness is powerful because it breaks cycles. When one person throws words like stones and the other chooses silence, the momentum stops. No fuel is added to the fire. Silence is not always weakness. In fact, it is often strength in disguise. When used with conscious intent, it becomes a boundary, a mirror, and sometimes a teacher. It allows others to witness their own echo and offers you the gift of conserving energy for places that nurture your growth. The detachment we speak of here also means not internalizing every experience. Not every criticism is a truth. Not every cold shoulder is a reflection of your worth. Not every conflict is yours to fix. The moment we learn that we can observe, reflect, and release without absorbing, we become emotionally self-sufficient. We are no longer at the mercy of someone else's mood or behavior. We stop seeking closure from those who never offered clarity. We stop waiting for an apology to feel whole again. Detachment becomes the doorway to freedom. This form of detachment is not about building walls, but about creating sacred space, a space where you can feel your emotions, acknowledge them, and still choose not to act on them in destructive ways. It's a process, not a switch. It requires patience with yourself. But over time, as you strengthen this inner muscle, you'll notice something beautiful. Peace no longer feels like a fragile state you have to chase. It becomes your baseline. And once you've tasted this inner peace, the noise of disrespect loses its power over you. It no longer has the ability to rattle your core, because you've reclaimed that power and placed it firmly in your own hands. Letting karma speak instead of retaliating requires a depth of self-awareness that does not come from pride, but from personal responsibility. When you choose not to react to disrespect, you're not surrendering your power, you're reclaiming it. There is a subtle but profound distinction between controlling the external and mastering the internal. Responsibility here doesn't mean you take the blame for others' behavior. It means you take ownership of how you respond to it. This distinction is where real transformation begins. To be responsible in the face of disrespect is to say, I refuse to let this moment define me. It is choosing not to spiral into the same emotional chaos that someone else is living in. And that is no easy task. It takes strength to sit with your anger, to acknowledge the sting of humiliation or rejection, and still choose not to act from that wounded space. It takes maturity to recognize that not every provocation deserves your energy, and not every disrespectful action requires an immediate counteraction. Responsibility in this form is restraint practiced with grace. When we understand the weight of our reactions, we begin to act more from intention than emotion. A responsible person does not suppress their feelings. They hold space for them. They ask, what am I feeling right now? Why does this disrespect hurt so much? Is it touching a wound that hasn't healed? Is this about me, or is this about the other person's projections? This kind of internal dialogue allows you to shift the focus from external validation to internal clarity. You stop looking outward for justification, and instead, you look inward for alignment. Taking responsibility also means understanding the long-term implications of your emotional investments. When you react to every slight, every insult, every disappointment, you're scattering your energy across a battlefield that yields no growth. But when you choose to preserve your energy, when you prioritize your peace over your pride, you begin to build something that is far more resilient than ego. Inner discipline, and this discipline becomes the foundation for emotional sovereignty. You no longer wait for others to give you permission to feel calm, to feel whole, or to move forward. You grant that to yourself. Another layer to responsibility is setting emotional boundaries, not as a form of punishment to others, but as protection for yourself. It's a conscious choice to not engage in dynamics that drain you. It's saying, I see what's happening, and I choose not to participate. That is a radical act of responsibility. It shifts the narrative from being a victim of circumstances to being the architect of your inner life. In doing so, you stop handing over the keys of your emotional well-being to people who've shown they don't know how to handle their own. And here is where karma quietly enters the conversation. When you take responsibility for your side of the interaction, You free yourself from the entanglement of trying to manage someone else's behavior. You don't need to wish ill upon them or hope they suffer. That's not your job. Life has a way of balancing itself. The energy people put out, good or bad, returns in forms that reflect their internal state. You don't need to be the enforcer of justice. What you need is to remain rooted in your values, anchored in your growth, and firm in your decision to rise above. Responsibility also means realizing that your silence can be louder than your words. That by choosing not to react, you're letting the universe handle what you were never meant to carry. You're saying, I trust that my peace is more powerful than their chaos. You're not running from the situation, you're rising above it, and that elevation cannot happen without accountability. Accountability for your triggers, for your healing, for your progress. You may not have started the fire, but you choose not to feed it, and that is where your power lies. Ultimately, personal responsibility is not about being passive. It is about being profoundly active in the management of your own growth. It is the deep recognition that while you cannot control every circumstance, you can control your response to them. And in doing so, you shift from being reactive to being deliberate, from being hurt to being whole. When disrespect comes knocking, let your silence be the gatekeeper, and let your character be the loudest voice in the room. Because karma does not respond to noise, it responds to energy. And the energy you preserve today will serve you tomorrow. Choosing silence after disrespect and trusting in the natural order of consequences, what many would call karma, is not an act of weakness, but of psychological depth and emotional clarity. The individual who remains silent is not devoid of emotion, but has mastered the art of internal regulation. Silence is not passive resignation. It is an assertion of inner power, a refusal to be pulled into the same destructive pattern that created the conflict. It is a deliberate decision to conserve energy, protect dignity, and wait for the unfolding of outcomes that inevitably follow action, even if unseen. In the moment of being disrespected, the instinct to retaliate can feel overwhelming. Our evolutionary wiring often equates silence with defeat, and so we fight back to assert dominance or self-worth. But in the terrain of psychological maturity, one comes to understand that reactive behavior only creates more entanglement. The individual who holds their silence recognizes that the process of consequence does not need their participation to function. Energy once put into the world circulates and returns just as cause leads to effect. To trust this is to step back and allow life to resolve its own equations. To believe that silence can speak louder than words is to understand energy in motion. When someone disrespects you and you respond with a chaotic defense, you mirror the very behavior you detest. But if you respond with centered stillness, it creates a psychological contrast. It exposes the imbalance in the other without requiring your aggression. The absence of emotional reaction becomes a mirror so clear that it reflects the inner disorder of the person who caused harm, and this reflection can often be more unsettling to them than anything you could have said. This does not mean one becomes emotionally detached or indifferent. Quite the opposite. It takes immense emotional intelligence to feel everything, hurt, betrayal, disappointment, and still choose not to let those emotions dictate your behavior. Silence becomes a container, not a void, but a space where energy is processed, understood, and transformed. In this space, one can hear their own thoughts more clearly, identify patterns, and choose a response rooted in long-term self-respect rather than short-term satisfaction. Karma, in its psychological essence, is not about punishment. It's about balance. Every action generates energy, and every energy seeks its return. When someone disrespects you, they are projecting an inner chaos that has not been resolved within themselves. You are simply the surface onto which that chaos is cast. If you internalize it, you become part of the dysfunction. But if you remain grounded, If you observe rather than absorb, then the energy of their action stays with them. Life, in its quiet intelligence, arranges for that energy to return to its origin in due time. People often assume that to remain silent is to accept mistreatment, but silence does not mean tolerance. It means you choose not to engage in the language of the person who disrespected you. Their behavior speaks one frequency, and you are tuned to another. That dissonance is felt more strongly in your absence of reaction than in any The silence becomes a message: I am not available for this kind of interaction. I operate on a different wavelength, and that distinction has a weight of its own. In many ways, silence is a kind of closure, not the closure we often seek from others, but the closure we give to ourselves. It is the acknowledgement that no further words are needed to define the situation. The disrespect has spoken for itself. The person's actions have revealed their character. You do not need to contribute further to that narrative. You can step away with your integrity intact, trusting that what must return to them will. Trusting karma is also trusting timing. You may not witness the consequence. You may never know how or when that energy returns. But trusting in its return is more about maintaining your own peace than anticipating their downfall. It's about letting go of the need to control outcomes and instead focusing on your own alignment. When you release the need for revenge, you free yourself from the emotional tether that keeps you bound to that person. And in that freedom, you heal, you grow, you rise. So the choice to stay silent is not made in ignorance or avoidance. It is made in deep awareness. It's a declaration that you value your peace over your pride, your growth over your ego, and your future over a fleeting victory. In that silence, karma begins its work, not because you commanded it, but because you stepped out of its way. When you choose silence in the face of disrespect, you're not surrendering, you're transcending. You're allowing the truth to do its work without interference, trusting that energy always circles back to its source. Disrespect reveals more about the other person than it does about you, and your quiet withdrawal is not a lack of strength, but a profound declaration of self-respect. In the space where most would react, you reflect. In the moment others would strike back, you step back. And in doing so, you rise above the chaos and allow life, in its subtle wisdom, to restore balance on its own terms. Let karma speak, not because you are powerless, but because you are finally powerful enough not to shout.